What's going on, class? How you guys doing? I chose to do my presentation on community violence. Community violence is the exposure of intentional acts of interpersonal violence committed by individuals in public areas. It can range from events such as shootings, riots, terrorist attacks, verbal, physical, emotional abuse, and of course that list goes on and on. Throughout this PowerPoint, I'll be taking a look at gang, adolescence, and domestic violence as it contributes to community violence as a whole. Gang violence. There's no clear definition of what a gang is. Some may refer to it as an organized group of criminals associated with gun violence and drug crime. I chose to talk about gang violence as it relates to the Black community, and I just chose to talk about Chicago, Illinois. As of right now, in 2019, there's been 97 homicides, and majority of it has been related to gun violence and our young African American males being the victims of the violence. In the city of Chicago, the notable gangs were the Gangster Disciples, Black Peace Stones, and the Latin Kings, which initiated the social and political reformation in the 1960s. Controlling gang violence, referral to services and programs, activities primarily catering to youth and trying to prevent them from joining gangs. There's also been anti-gang initiatives by the FBI, as you see. The National Gang Intelligence Center and also the Transnational Anti-Gang Task Force. Adolescence violence. It's an adverse childhood experience that is connected to other forms of violence such as child abuse, neglect, domestic violence, suicide, and also sexual violence. Homicides is the second leading cause in death in our adolescents from ages 10 to 24. I researched a study that was conducted that out of 935 urban youth, 45% of them witnessed serious acts of violence. Some of the risk factors are learning disabilities, histories of violence, chronic poverty, and the relationship amongst peers and families. And to the right here, are some of the protective factors in reference to adolescence violence. Community violence impact on youth. Youth in low-income neighborhoods, particularly the crime rate in urban areas, is significantly higher than rural areas and even suburban areas. Also, for an example, one of the impacts that stood out to me is the psychosocial impact, where that some youth respond to encounters of violence differently than some that may not be accustomed to it, such as a child who grows up in a neighborhood hearing gunshots daily may respond emotionally different than a child who's not accustomed to that type of activity. Low-income communities and its relationship to the violent crime rates is now an epidemic, and it's a social issue that has become a dire need. Also, one of the significant rates that stick out is the African American youth being the leading cause in death right now. And also community violence daily contribution to the school to prison pipeline. And now, often they're not even going to the prison anymore. They're going straight from school to the graveyard. Domestic violence. As we know, domestic violence comes in all shapes and forms. Verbal, psychological, physical, but most commonly will be physical. And as you see, it's just some facts about domestic violence and its impact on children development and some of the factors that could alleviate the effects of being exposed to domestic violence. Poverty, as it relates to violence, there's no clear indicator that poverty and violence go hand in hand, but typically when you are dealing with someone, when you're dealing with violence, you also can attach that to a poverty-stricken neighborhood oftentimes. A major social issue, one particularly, which is very important to me, is the school to prison pipeline. The school to prison pipeline is policies and practices that pushes the students, particularly at-risk students, out of the classroom and into the juvenile criminal justice system. And here are some of the factors that affect youth. Two that stick out to me is the zero tolerance policy and also the school's climate. That determines a lot. For me, it starts with the head, and then it trickles down to the students. And oftentimes kids are being pushed out of these classrooms because of the school climate. And lastly would be the mass incarceration. That's now also an epidemic. Some may refer to it as the new Jim Crow, where that people, primarily minorities of color, are being criminalized for nonviolent acts such as drug trafficking, nothing violent, and are being sentenced to prison and jail time. At this time, there are 2.3 million people incarcerated in prison and jails today. Okay. All right, and that's the end of my PowerPoint. Thank you guys for watching my video, and there will be a link to the PowerPoint attached to the video. Thanks. You guys have a good one.